Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Before the absolute global fame, before the massive contracts, and long before the swirling controversies and endless headlines, Neymar was really just a skinny kid playing football barefoot in the streets of Brazil. Today, we're unpacking a genuinely tragic narrative. We're going to explore how a young boy whose pure, unadulterated love for the game was so obvious was slowly and relentlessly crushed by the impossible expectations of the global sports machine.
Which brings us right to a central, really heartbreaking question. What actually happens when an entire nation, a place where football is literally identity, hope, and escape, demands absolute perfection from just one human being?
Okay, let's dive into this. Because the contrast here is staggering. On one side, we have exactly what the world demanded, the next Pelé, the ultimate savior of Brazilian football. But on the other side, the human reality. We're talking about a skinny kid from Mogi das Cruzes whose family all shared a tiny house, just trying to survive financially. The massive gap between that sky-high expectation and his day-to-day reality, well, that's exactly where our story begins.
Part 1. Barefoot freedom and pure joy.
Now, to truly understand the weight Neymar ended up carrying, you absolutely have to understand his foundation. Early on, his father saw a once-in-a-generation talent and worked hard to protect his future, for sure. But his development wasn't some robotic, academy-drilled process. It was built on barefoot freedom in the streets. And that freedom translates to one defining word: joy. It meant playing without fear or hesitation, treating the game not as a grueling job, but as an act of pure, unfiltered creativity. When he first arrived at Santos FC, he was literally playing like a kid in the street, bringing raw emotion, massive smiles, and impossible dribbles to what was becoming a very tactical, rigid world. He was a complete phenomenon.
Part 2. The shadow of two legends.
But as we all know, pure joy rarely survives the high-stakes business of modern football undisturbed. In 2013, leaving the comfort of Brazil, Neymar stepped into a totally different universe of massive pressure at Barcelona. And he was spectacular. He joined Lionel Messi and Luis Suarez to form the completely unstoppable MSN attacking trio. I mean, they absolutely dominated Europe, winning the Champions League and domestic titles. He delivered these fast, fearless, explosive performances. So the crucial point is, despite all of his absolute brilliance, the spotlight always inevitably drifted back to Messi. Neymar was ultimately trapped in a legendary shadow. And being in that shadow triggered a profound psychological shift. Neymar realized that just winning trophies alongside another absolute legend, it just wasn't going to be enough to satisfy the expectations people had placed on him since he was a kid. He didn't just want shared success anymore, he wanted his own legacy. He realized he needed his own team, his own era, to become the undisputed, absolute king of the sport.
Part 3. The 200 million burden.
To prove he could be the main character, he made a decision that altered football forever, leaving Barcelona for Paris Saint-Germain. Now, what's really interesting about this is just the sheer scale of the move. 200 million euros. It was a massive transfer fee that completely shocks the world. But you have to realize, this wasn't just a sports contract. It was a cold, crushing financial investment. That is a price tag that buys the world's absolute unforgiving attention.
So he bought the spotlight. He got it. But in doing so, he completely lost his freedom. What started out so perfectly in Paris, the goals, the highlight reels, slowly mutated into incredible isolation. He faced just relentless criticism. People began to ruthlessly dissect and question his focus, his discipline, even his lifestyle. The exact same creativity and flair the world once absolutely adored was suddenly being weaponized against him, labeled as arrogance.
Part 4. The breaking of a savior. This is the darkest chapter, where that immense pressure of being Brazil's symbol of hope really began to physically and mentally break him down. Just look at the tragic rhythm of his prime years. Every single time Neymar found his footing, every time he looked ready to take over the world completely, devastating ankle and foot injuries stopped him cold, things entirely out of his control. And instead of getting empathy for missing major tournaments, these physical setbacks were met with vicious, unrelenting public backlash. Actually, scratch that. To understand the true origin of this trauma, we have to rewind back to the 2014 World Cup nightmare. The weight of an entire nation rested squarely on his shoulders, at home in Brazil. He was playing brilliantly, pure energy, pure confidence. Then,
a brutal challenge from behind, a fractured vertebra. His dream literally ends on a stretcher, and without him, Brazil suffers that historic, tragic 7-1 collapse against Germany. And even though he wasn't even on the pitch, that explosive emotional pain and failure were forever connected to him. It absolutely shattered him.
From that point on, his career turned into this haunting balancing act. The magic was absolutely still there, right? The impossible dribbles, the beautiful goals, the pure creativity, but it was constantly weighed down by mental exhaustion. Global attacks on his personality and constant judgment turned the free-flowing game he loved into a heavy, taxing obligation. Having every mistake weaponized by the public meant that the barefoot joy he started with was actively fading away.
Part 5. The Tragedy of Impossible Expectations. Which forces us to take a really hard look in the mirror at how we consume and ultimately destroy the superstars we create. When an athlete is burdened with the expectation of an entire nation, anything short of absolute perfection is viewed as a failure. Which brings us to these two words, wasted potential. I just want you to pause and think about how absurd, and frankly, how cruel it is to attach that label to a career defined by such monumental success.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because the labels simply do not match the reality. A European failure? The guy is a Champions League winner. Lacking discipline? He's secured multiple domestic league titles. Overrated? He is a once-in-a-generation global superstar who has inspired and entertained literally millions of people. To call his undeniable achievements wasted just because he wasn't the exact replica of Pelé is a staggering injustice. And all of that injustice really culminated in his desperate final push at the 2022 World Cup. He entered that tournament carrying crushing pressure, criticism, and yet so much hope. And honestly, he looked incredible on the pitch, sharp, confident. But then came the heartbreaking elimination for Brazil. The images of Neymar crying, those weren't just the tears of a disappointed athlete. He wept like a man carrying years of accumulated pain. It was the terrifying realization that time was running out and that his foundational joy had been completely stolen by the pressure.
His story is a stark reminder of the human cost of greatness. Greatness creates impossible expectations. Neymar gave us unbelievable magic. He gave us memories, unmatched creativity, and a style of play that made football feel truly, wonderfully alive. But in return, we demanded an impossible, flawless reality from a single, highly vulnerable human being.
So I want to leave you with this final lingering thought to deeply consider. Looking back at the boy who just wanted to play barefoot in the streets with pure joy, did Neymar fail football? Or did our impossible expectations fail Neymar? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Think about that question, and I'll catch you next time.